So I'm probably more of a conqueror than I am with Mediterranean, although I'm happy to pay Mediterranean prices for education. But I'm really excited to speak with you today. I'm going to share with you part of my favorite book of the Bible. Colossians is actually my favorite book of the Bible, and the passage we're going to look at is from there. And there's a lot of reasons why it's my favorite. Honestly, it's one of those, I don't know if you have a passage like this, or just a time when God really kind of met you in your Bible, and like you almost have like I actually have sap from a tree sitting in a park in France we're in Colossians, because God really just spoke to me and used that book for me in a huge kind of season of like, what am I going to do, Lord? How am I going to get through this? So what happened was, it was early on in my staff career. I had never led a trip or been responsible for people much at that point. I had never been overseas. I speak zero French, and they asked me to lead a group of people over in France for summer. And I was like, I'm totally freaking out, actually. I'm actually a really bad traveler, too. So it's like all the bad things kind of were coming into one. I was like, what on earth am I going to do, Lord? And so I remember when we were just like picking as a leadership team, like what we were going to study, my co-leader and I, he's like, how about Colossians? I'm like, hey, sure, I've not read much of that one. Short, okay. I mean, so what a great leadership start, you know, just kind of like, sure, that sounds good. But I just know that the Lord picked that just for me that summer, because there's just so many promises that He wanted to drive down into my heart. I feel like it was like my anchor in that time, and that's a lot of what God's Word has been for me in other seasons too. But when I think about Colossians, I think about some of my favorite verses. He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of His Son He loves. He, Jesus, is before all things. In Him, all things hold together. And then in Colossians 2:10, you have been given fullness in Christ. Like, these are the kind of things that just were like running through my head as I was in France, going, how do I not lose these people? How do I get around? My French is, I learned how to say, like, je voudrais that. Like, I would like that is always a good, like, thing to learn in another country. But other than that, it was just, je m'appelle Becky, je suis American, je ne comprends pas, which means I'm American, I don't know what I'm doing, basically. So, like, God was bigger than all that. He met me in, like I said, through the book of Colossians, but just even in that step of faith that I took to go overseas and experience Him. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to share from Colossians. We're actually going to go to chapter 3. A little background on the book of Colossians, if you aren't familiar with it. It's written by Paul. It's a letter that he wrote when he was in prison, and it's addressed to a group of people they'd actually never met, which is kind of interesting. So this young church was started by a guy named Epaphras. My Bible said I used to call him Epaph or whatever. He became a follower of Jesus, and then he went and took the message that took what he had experienced back to his hometown. So he just, like, this hometown guy went back, started a church, and has all these young believers, people growing in their faith. But, like happened to a lot of people in those times, there were false teachers that were coming in and saying things that were not true, that was kind of making them question, well, what is true? Is what Paul said true? Or what Epaphras taught is true? Or are these guys what's saying true? So they were kind of in a season of being rattled. And so Paul wrote this letter and sent it to Epaphras to read to his church, to strengthen them in their faith. And I feel like, again, this is what God has used this book for me to do, is kind of anchor my faith, and I feel that's what He did for them as well. So, as I said, there's a lot of great truths in this book, and I'd say chapters 1 and 2 are really kind of packed with what they call the doctrinal, or like statements about what we believe. It's all about how Jesus is enough. And Jesus, when we have Jesus, we're enough. So now in chapter 3, the book shifts, connecting the doctrinal, or what we believe, to the practical. How do we actually live our lives? So, and I actually love that they're connected. You don't just believe one thing and live your life a different way. What you believe affects how you live your life. And that's what he's kind of talking about here. So if you want to turn with me to chapter 3, we're going to read verses 1 through 14. So if you don't have an actual Bible with you, feel free to use a Bible app. I like the U version if you don't have downloaded one before. I'm going to read through that, and then we're going to just unpack it a little bit. So, Colossians 3, 1 through 14. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of its Creator. Here there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is in all, or is all and is in all. Therefore, God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So there is a lot in there. And like I said, it's kind of getting into how to live your life, but it's totally connected, again, to what they believe. And so you notice there's words like since then and therefore, meant to kind of make them look back on the last chapters and remember that it's only by Christ's work in our lives that we can do these things that he mentions here, that we can get rid of that old and put on the new. So he's the one that enables us to do that. So as we kind of unpack it, I'm going to break it down to kind of three main ideas. So because we have been raised with Christ, we have a new life, we have a new focus, and we have a new way of relating to people. So first off, new life. You'll notice in verses 1 through 4 that Paul uses a lot of the same imagery that we talk about at Easter. It talks about death and resurrection and appearing in glory, talking about what Jesus did for us on the cross. And yet, it's interesting because he connects that to us. We have died. We have been raised. We get to live life with God. So it's like we get to experience the same thing without actually experiencing it. And this is said in a lot of other different ways in Paul's letters. In Galatians 2:20, he says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. So he's talking about this, you've died, just like Jesus died and rose again. You died, your old self has died, and a new self has risen. If you're like me, you're like, okay, cool, I've heard some of that stuff before, but day to day, this is maybe harder to realize. We kind of have a tendency to go, oh yeah, my old self is dead, but kind of not really. But then live a little bit more like this. I'm going to read from a book called Grace Walk, this guy's analogy that I thought was really helpful. He's talking, says, perhaps you've heard the one about the bulldog and the terrier who fought every time they were together. The bulldog was strong because he was consistently well fed, while the terrier was weak because he rarely ate. So every time the dogs fought, the bulldog would emerge the winner. So what do you need to do if you want to guarantee that the terrier will always win and the bulldog will always lose? You feed the terrier and starve the bulldog. Eventually the terrier would become stronger and the bulldog weaker. So this point is usually made with the story that Christians possess an old and new nature. These two natures are in conflict with each other all the time. If you want the terrier within you, your old nature, to win over the bulldog, or want the terrier to win over the bulldog, so the old, new or the old, you just have to feed the new and starve the old. So that's, in a lot of ways that sounds practical, like just make good choices and you'll experience a better life. There's truth in that. But the thing that he points out here is that there's a flaw in this illustration. He says there's just one problem with this story. It illustrates a lie. It presents a lie that it will absolutely enslave those of us who believe on it and act on its message. What this illustration fails to tell you is that the bulldog is dead. So it's not so much that we have to overpower our old self, because we can't actually crucify ourselves. We can only be crucified with Christ. And because of that, the old self has lost its power. Okay, another way to maybe think of that is that our sinful nature isn't just weakened, it actually is dead, like the dog. So sorry, no offense to dogs. I'm not a dog person, so it's meant to be a commentary on actual dogs. But another way to think of it is Jesus didn't just patch up our old lives or old clothes. He gave us a whole brand new set of them. And when we start to live that truth out, that we have been given a whole new life, not just kind of like trying to fix our old life, it changes the freedom and the power and the way that we live our lives. So, I know that's kind of a big thought, but we can kind of continue going on that. I know some of you are also thinking, wait a second, what about verse 5? It says, put to death. Doesn't that sound like something we have to do? So if our old nature is dead, why are we supposed to put to death what belongs to our old earthly nature, right? Good question. Well, Paul isn't saying again that we have to die again, but rather that the old ways are dead and we have to stop living like they are dead. Does that make sense? I got some kind of like confusion about the faces. So he's saying it's not so much that you have to change what happened, so much as live like it actually did happen. Live like Christ is in your life and like he has changed you. Kind of like a prisoner who's been set free, but then chooses to stay in prison. We think that person's kind of crazy, right? Like, you're free, you could go, but they're choosing to stay in prison. So that's part of what Paul is talking about. But not only that, so he's talking about you have this new life, you have this freedom. I want you to experience it, basically. Next thing he talks about, though, is not only a new life, but also a new focus. So you see in verses 1 and 2, it says, set our hearts and our minds above, not on earthly things. So what does he mean there? It's to keep our hearts and minds oriented towards God and his kingdom rather than ourselves or the things the world would tell us to pursue. It's focusing on the new clothes rather than the old ones. But there's a problem, and I think some of us have experienced this. We don't always like to get rid of old clothes. I find this to be true with real clothes. Anyone else have this problem? This drives my mother crazy. I'm sure moms around the world get driven crazy by this. You know, my mom will see that we needed new socks or shoes. She'd go get us some and be like, okay, here you go. And I'd be like, but I like my old ones. I'm just gonna wear them. But they're falling apart. They're awful, But they're really comfortable. That's what I'm used to. I've had them for so long. We make these excuses and we hold on to the old. And we drive, like I said, we drive our mothers crazy. But the problem is, the thing is about our old self is it's not just kind of worn out, dingy clothes. It's really awful stuff. Look at how it's described in the verses here. It uses words like sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil, desires, greed, idolatry, rage, malice, slander, filthy language. These aren't just worn out clothes. These are toxic things in our lives. If these things are ruling our lives, it's not a healthy thing. And so he's saying, get rid of that stuff. Wear the new clothes that you've been given rather than clinging on to the old clothes. And the new clothes are so much better. Look at some of the words to describe them. Love, compassion, peace, gratitude, forgiveness. Totally different. Totally healthy and awesome if you're living out those things. So, because of Christ, we have the new life. We have a new focus, new clothes, going on with it. And I think the last thing I want to point out is we have a new way to relate to other people. Because that's the thing that we maybe sometimes forget. A lot of us living in the Western culture, we have this kind of individualistic mindset when we read the Bible. We tend to think about it just between us and God, like it's a vertical relationship only. And we fail to recognize that how we live impacts people around us, that we don't live in a bubble. We have people in our lives. And so when we're, for example, clothed in anger, it's going to affect our people around us. You think about it, when you're really angry, what kind of things happen? Maybe you have a short fuse. You say things you don't mean. You hold a grudge. You start to gossip. You push away people. You complain and grumble. If people around you, if you're doing that to the people in your life, it not only hurts your ability to connect with the Lord, it damages your relationship. It's toxic to the people around you. And that's not what God intended. On the other hand, if you depend on the Spirit and clothe yourself, like one of the other ones there, like compassion, you start to look at people through God's eyes. And that changes everything, because it makes you start to become available for him to use you in the lives of other people. Or if you think about it on the other someone that's just filled with joy, it's contagious. It rubs off on you, not only on, just the person who's experiencing it. And so this is what our world needs, honestly. Not only, and I noticed that as I was reading through this, I have a tendency to think, oh yeah, I need this. But he's also speaking to a body of Christ and saying, your community needs this. You as a body need to be clothed with new clothes, not just you personally to experience a good life. You together need to experience that. And then as we do, we experience the kind of body and community that he wants for us to have. So that's kind of the hope and the dream, but I think if I'm being honest, it can be tough to actually make that choice to put away the old clothes and put on the new. And I've just been reminded of this lately. Actually, to be very real, there's a woman in my church that I would probably describe as an extra grace required person for me. She's kind of loud and stubborn, and she just says things that makes me want to just either avoid her or like argue with her because she's very rational. She's kind of needy. Like, I could go on and on, unfortunately, in my heart. So if I'm being honest, my default response to her is pretty ugly. It's like a tattered old clothes. I often catch myself losing patience with her, wanting to not invite her to different things, wanting to just even complain about her to other people. That's all stuff that's what my old self is going to do. That's what I'm going to do apart from God's work in my life. And so how do I fix that? What do I do? Is it by trying harder, like pumping up myself, okay, I'm going to love this person. That lasts about 5 minutes, and then she says something else again, and I'm like, oh. It's only by faith in God's finished work on the cross for me. It's only by putting on the clothes that he gave me, that he died to give me, that I can treat her with love and compassion, that I can be patient. And I have to do that by faith. Just as I received Christ into my life by faith, recognizing I can't do this, God, I need you, so we walk by faith in our lives, putting our faith in his Spirit to do the things that we can't do on our own. And so I encourage you, as we're going to transition to worship, and worship team, do you want to kind of start to come up? You can. I want to encourage you just to think about what's going on in your life right now. Where are you maybe struggling to recognize that old dog is dead? Where are you kind of letting it stay? Are you staying in that prison rather than experiencing the freedom and the changed life he would have for you? I'm going to pray for us, and then I'll let the worship team take over. So, God, we thank you for the hope that we have as we look to your word, that when we recognize our own inadequacy, we see, God, that you have, you're enough. We have fullness in you. And so, God, would you teach us how to live this out, how to put on the new clothes and recognize that you took away the old. So, yeah, God, I just pray that you would meet